All right, we're here with Rita Bowen from HealthPort at the HIMSS 2013 conference, and we're going to discuss the new HIPAA Omnibus rule. So tell us, what are some of the major changes that came from the HIPAA Omnibus rule?
Well, the major change was it finally was released. That was the main thing, was it finally came out in January. Some major issues that came with that rule. One little tweak that I think is going to be very hard for people to possibly enforce long term would be the ability when a patient wants to pay cash out of pocket to blind some information they may not want to go to their health plan. Is the question, will you be able to sequester that information from the flow? Because there's so much flow of information upstream, downstream now. With an electronic health record, physicians often, may cut and paste information from one episode to another episode. So if there's something that was supposed to be sequestered from a health plan, how do we assure that it's going to be sequestered from a health plan? So there's some questions that have got to be asked of organizations regarding how are you going to do that? Where will there be one place? Is there one central place where that would be noted? And is that the first go-to place, and then everybody has to go there and then go out?
And they really need the involvement of the EHR.
Absolutely.
Otherwise they're dead in the water.
That's correct. So that's going to be a real an issue, because I think there's so many different points of information flow, and then there may have been release of information not in the traditional sense from an HIM perspective, but maybe information has been shared maybe from the lab or from the radiology department, these other departments. This may force organizations to look at true enterprise-wide release of information, centralizing it into one hub so that it can be controlled. Because it would be very hard for all the various source systems to have that indication there. So that's one major issue. A lot of the changes were very sort of slight from what has been happening with privacy. I think another big focus is that now on equal footing is the business associate and the covered entity.
Right.
And I think that's good. From a perspective of, we're all working with that health information. It puts the responsibility on everybody for protection. And part of the changes there was, the fact that the covered entity and the business associate have to do the risk assessment regarding the harm. And I think that's going to prove over time, how will that be done consistently, so everyone's doing it consistently the same.
Right.
Because right now it gives you the 4 factors that you're supposed to look for, but it doesn't tell you how to actually do the assessment.
Yeah, you're going to have a much deeper relationship with anyone you have a business associate agreement with.
It brings the veil down, so there's complete transparency and for the sharing of that information, and it shares the responsibility for the patient's trust, so the patient has that.
And it shares some of the liability too, right?
Absolutely, the liability is going to be shared as well.
And so, what's the timeline we're looking at for implementing these changes and making sure you're compliant with these changes?
Well, the rule had been out there in limbo for a long time, so they only had to give you 90 days once it was released. So the end of March 25th, is the actual compliance date. Enforcement date is September, at the end of September. So it gives you a little bit of time if you're not quite ready by the end of March, but it means we need to be running through the cycle now. So organizations need to be looking at what needs to be updated. Marketing and fundraising, was another area of change for how information could be used and how it can be shared. So you need to look at, if you have business associates that may be doing that for you, that may have to be a modification for your business associate agreement. So your organizations, your covered entities, need to be looking at the various business associate agreements that they have. I would suggest putting them in date order, because if you've got one that was new after January 25th that you just signed, it needs to be meeting the rule now. But if it had already been in place, then you've got some time. You've got that year. So I would sequence them as to when they're due, so you know what you need to do for your assessments.
That's good. And the changes to the marketing stuff was how you use PHI to market to them?
How you use PHI, the de-identification factors. In November, the identification process was released in, I think it was late November of last year, and it really does require that someone within an organization who is certified in that electronic health record that truly knows how it flows can do the de-identification. Because, you know, you can say, I'm going to de-identify this piece of paper by redacting something,
Right.
but in an electronic world, when it's flowing from here to there,
It's a little
do you
different.
know which gate to close so it doesn't flow? It's a little bit different, so it involves a bigger spectrum, and it has to be done by someone. It doesn't require what background they are. It doesn't
Right.
say anything about that. It just says they need to be certified that they truly understand that EMR.
Interesting. And
That
so-
wasn't part of that rule. That was released earlier, but that ties
Okay.
together.
Right. And so what are some practical things that organizations can do to make sure that they're in compliance and that they're ready for so that they don't have CMS coming after them?
Well, I think the first thing, of course, is to refresh their education on HIPAA for all their employees. So it's a time to look at their education session and possibly refresh to the new rule if things need to be modified. They may need to repost their notice of privacy practices, and that can be part of that refreshment process for the employees as well. But then actually having that available when a patient comes to the front desk and says, I need that information, if anything has been modified. Now, health plans will have to modify their notice of privacy practice, but an organization may not. They may have already covered everything. Maybe they didn't have anything that was impacted by the change. So may or may not need to do that, but those processes will still be there.
I imagine there's a lot of work with business associates that.
The business associate, I think, is the business associate agreement, the BAA, should state it specifically how you're authorized. If I'm your business associate, you as the covered entity should be stating in that agreement exactly how I'm authorized to use that information. And the limitations should be contained within that document. So it is a good time to look at those as well, if that level of detail has not already been there.
So I've heard some people describe the HIPAA rule as an old rule that doesn't understand the new generation of electronic documentation and social media and all of those things. Do you think HIPAA Omnibus reaches that goal of kind of modernizing HIPAA, or do you think we still have a ways to go?
I think it is a good attempt, but realize this took 10 years to get from where it was to now.
For any modification.
Right, for
Pretty
any
much.
modification. But I think you're right. Physicians are using not social media, but they're using handheld devices. So I think the whole component that's really pushing is the fact that encryption has to be in place. No one's trying to say technology shouldn't be used, because we want it to be used, but to be used in an environment that's safe. So it's really just stating also, you as a business associate has the same level of responsibility for encryption. And if it's even not encrypted, you got to understand the information is protected.
Sure.
So,
Sure. How you use
the
it.
reporting, and if a business associate hasn't already been reporting if a breach occurred on their behalf to that association, to that covered entity, they will need to start doing that, because there'll be definitely enforcement over time with that if they are not doing it.
And were there changes to any penalties with the new HIPAA Omnibus, or
Yes, there are new penalties that have been leveled where actually the cap goes a little higher.
Okay.
And the enforcement process also now goes into willful disregard. So there's like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and 4. 3, 4 are the highest, but once you're willfully just ignoring the fact that you should have been doing this. But then you have time to mitigate.
Okay.
That upper tier is you willfully did it and you didn't try to mitigate. You didn't try to resolve the issue. You didn't try to stop it from going out again and do self-correction and education to the employees. That's a whole different ballgame, and it could go up to 1.5 per encounter. So it could go to the highest level, the $1.5 million per incident. It could go to the highest level immediately if it was considered to be willful and that you didn't try to mitigate. So mitigation is another component that as you are working through a breach notification process, the covered entity is going to want to know, okay, I'm seeing that you had this breach occur, and you've reported it to me. You've said the employee went through education, they've done this. but I'm seeing it still happening. So what are you doing? What are you really doing to improve your process? They're gonna want to look at improvements to statistics. So if people haven't been organizing their breach data, whether it's a covered entity or a business associate, they need to look at their process from that standpoint. And a HIMAA released, I believe it was in October year before last, they did a best practice that was released on how information should be organized and how it should be looked at from a reporting standpoint so you could actually track breaches.
Well, it seems like the tracking of the breaches and monitoring it and mitigating it's going to be a huge
absolutely. Trend
industry.
analysis. It's not just the fact that you said you've done an assessment. The key is the analysis. So you can do all the assessments you want to, and it goes, oh, I've done an assessment, it's here, but what does it mean? So the analysis of the assessment is the true key component to make sure that it's improving.
Excellent. Thanks for your time.
Okay.